Hello, everybody. I'm the 100 Proof News Hound here with another episode of the 100 Years and More Show. Every once in a while, a man comes along who changes the way we look at the world. And sometimes he can even change the way the world looks. And in order to be tested, that man needs a challenge that's equal to his ambition. I give you Frederick Law Olmsted and the development and building of Central Park. Olmsted created the very idea of a landscape architect. And for 10 years, his life meshed with that of New York City to create, well, the most famous urban retreat in the world. Well, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. The subscription will tell you when the next episode drops. And I can tell you right now it's going to be next Monday, but subscribe anyways. Now, Frederick Olmsted was born in Hartford, Connecticut in 1822. Born the son of a prosperous merchant, so he's not subject to any privations as a young man. But his mother dies when he's only 4 years old. And what did she die of? She dies of a laudanum overdose. Laudanum's that wonderful substance that's 10% opium and 90% alcohol. You know, it's safe and effective when used as directed. Not really. It's basically heroin for housewives, and his mother died of it. Dad sends him away to Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts. You know, Phillips Academy, that's the place where all the Bushes went, where Jack Lemmon went, Bill Belichick, Humphrey Bogart. Basically, if you were a swell in New York City, you went to the Phillips Academy. There, he takes civil engineering and drafting, and those are a couple of things that will serve him well in his later career. Now, after leaving high school, he does what you and I would normally do. He gets on a clipper ship and he sails to China. No, really, he gets on a ship. He sails to China. There's no Panama Canal back then, so he's going around Cape Horn through the Straits of Magellan, and he's gone for a year. When he comes home, Dad sets him up, buys him a couple of farms. He buys one in Connecticut, and he buys one on Staten Island called Tossamuck, and he runs those farms for a few years. In 1850, he goes on a trip to England, and he goes there specifically to look at their agricultural situation, and while doing so, he looks at the park system. He becomes enthralled with Birkenhead, a park. It's one of the first public parks in the world. It was founded in 1847, just outside of Liverpool. It's 140 acres, so about 1/6 the size of what Central Park will eventually be, but it gives them some good ideas and gives them a good foundation in park design. When he gets back home in 1852, he becomes an author. He publishes a book called Walks and Talks of an American farmer in England. It's fairly well received, especially the notations he has about the park system there, and he notes that at that point in time there are no real public parks aside from Birkenhead. That the big municipal parks in London, like St. James Park and Kensington Park and Hyde Park, those are former royal hunting grounds that just over the passage of time and with the democratization of the nation became parks. But there was never one that was actually designed from scratch in the London area and in the rest of England, save Birkenhead. He continues on his writing career, and he becomes a correspondent for the New York Times, writing under the name Yeoman. And what he does is he goes down south. He goes and examines the state of affairs in the southern United States, specifically with respect to slavery. And he goes on a series of 3 expeditions between 1856 and 1860. His first book is called Seaboard Slave States by Frederick Law Olmsted. And he writes them from the perspective not of an abolitionist firebrand. He wants to just show people what it really is like down there and let them decide, because he's pretty sure once they hear about it, they're going to dislike it as much as he does. But the New Orleans Delta Observer notes, prejudiced as his opinions were, he was not a willfully dishonest man or an unfair writer. We would welcome a few more men of his caliber among us. Prejudiced, but manly and honest. It's pretty high praise from a New Orleans newspaper. This is the kind of thing that you're up against in the 1850s in America when you're having arguments about the rationality of slavery. This is in the New York Times, not an editorial, but a commentary. It says here, the question which the Standard magazine assumes to answer is, as we understand this, can free white laborers endure the heat to which they must subject themselves in order to engage in the cultivation of cotton? How simplistic. If you ever watched the movie Cool Hand Luke, you see guys in a chain gang in Georgia in August. I've never seen people sweat so much or work so hard. Yes, free white people can work in the cotton fields. They just didn't want to. With respect to his final book, Olmsted in the Backcountry, the Independent New York newspaper writes on August 9th, 1860, Mr. Frederick Law Olmsted's journey in the slaveholding states have already resulted in 2 well-written volumes descriptive of manners, morals, agriculture, acts, and civilization generally in that portion of our country. It illustrates more effectively, perhaps, than either of its predecessors the disastrous influence of slavery on the white population of the slaveholding states. And that's important. He's criticizing slavery, not from the slave's perspective, but from the free white perspective and what it does to you both physically and morally. It's following this book that he writes probably his most famous quote as it relates to social justice issues. Quote, "The citizens of the cotton states as a whole are poor. They work little, and that little badly. They earn little, they sell little, they buy little, and they have little, very little of the common comforts and consolations of a civilized life. Their destitution is not material only, it is intellectual and it is moral. They were neither generous nor hospitable, and their talk was not that of evenly courageous men." Very similar criticisms to de Tocqueville in his treatise with respect to his tour of the southern states. De Tocqueville noticed an immediate decline in wealth and living standards as soon as he crossed the Ohio River, and so does Olmsted. In Olmsted's opinion, slavery denigrates work, and it brings the value of human labor down to zero. And it's the exact opposite of the work ethic in the northern states at that time. Now, we'll turn our attention back to which is Central Park. We've already mentioned that there are no big major public parks basically anywhere that were designed from scratch. You had some original fellows like Capability Brown who would take the Duke's residence and duke it up with the English country style. That's flowing lawns, giant water features, copses of trees off in the distance. But that kind of thing, it may be impressive in a manor house situation, but it doesn't serve the public who wants more of a tamed forest approach to their leisure. The Americans at that time get that sort of thing not from public parks, they get them from cemeteries. There's famous cemeteries in Boston, there's some in New York City. They're landscaped, they have paths, they have the trees that the public wants. And I've got a photograph here of a Boston cemetery, 1870 or so, where the black-clad populace is roaming about the tombstones. So that seems to be what is extant before the development of Central Park. And in its creepy way, it does serve the purpose of a park, but it's not really what the public would want. Now, the first indication that there's a groundswell of sentiment for a park occurs in New York City in 1851 in the New York Daily Herald, Thursday, May 8th. The mayor, Ambrose Kingsland, states, "The mayor proposes to the corporation to purchase grounds somewhere to the north of the streets now being built upon for the purpose of having a splendid park, similar to Hyde Park in London or the Champs-Élysées in Paris. It is a capital idea. There's a piece of ground covered with old forest trees containing 300 acres between 3rd Avenue and the East River and north of 40th Street that would furnish a most admirable site for such a purpose." Let's break that down. There's a couple things here. The city, north of where the city is, by the 1850s, the city's moving northward. There was in 1811, there was a commissioner's report that outlined they took the whole map of Manhattan and subdivided it. They divided it into streets, into lots, and to a great extent, that is still the plan that's there today. So the streets had the same numbers that they have now, and by 1850, development's up to about 30th Street. Some as north as 40, but you're 20 blocks from 59th Street where the park is eventually going to begin. The second part of that is the land that was proposed in the mayor's statement is actually James Woods Park. It's off the East River, as described in the note. They tried to annex it twice, and both times it was for some reason ruled unconstitutional, and that caused the powers that be to focus upon the 750 acres that is now part of Central Park, from 59th Street up to 106th Street and between 3rd Avenue and 8th Avenue. Sorry, between 5th Avenue and 8th Avenue, of course. Now, it was noted in the New York Herald of October 6, 1857. This is before they have a design for the park. All they have is an idea for the park. But they start a commission and start raising funds and getting things in order. It says here, the Central Park commissioners sent in a communication asking for the creation of a funded stock in order to enable them to procure funds to go on the proposed improvements in the park. Some 700 men are now employed in the work. They got 700 people working, clearing the land, draining the land, getting the land ready for a park without any real idea of what the park eventually is going to look like. One of the reasons that that particular area was so good for a park, aside from it being sparsely populated, was that the Croton Aqueduct system, which brought water from 41 miles north of New York City to New York City, terminated right in the middle of Central Park with a 25-acre reservoir. So you had an instant supply of fresh water that which would fill your lakes and would power your fountains and have all that going for it. So you had that water supply from the Croton Reservoir already in Central Park. The New York Tribune reports on Saturday, September 12th, 1857, with respect to Central Park, that the board proceeded to vote for a superintendent, and that the winner was Frederick Law Olmsted. Now, he's now being put in charge of the project, all right? This is before there's even a plan, but he's being put in charge of the project to develop the site. Now, why him? We've seen his resume, but look at it from an 1857 perspective. He owns a farm, so he knows something about agriculture. He studied civil engineering and drafting at college. He's observed the European parks and written a book on parks. That thin resume makes him probably the most qualified person in America at that time to organize and oversee the development of a major urban park. There isn't anybody else with more qualifications than that, even though by today's standards, that wouldn't get him a door on an internship job, but it's 1857. Now, they want to have a competition to see what design the park is going to take. And so they invite tenders from anybody who chooses to do so. And 33 entities, people, companies, submit proposals. New York Times, April 30th, 1858, the Central Park Plan. On Wednesday night, the Commissioner of Central Park, after nearly a month of deliberation upon 33 plans for the improvement of the 700 acres so wisely set apart for relief of the lungs and delights of the eyes in our metropolitan population, decides which one's going to win. And amazingly enough, the one that wins is the one submitted by Calvert Vaux and Frederick Law Olmsted. They're partners, and they'll be partners for the next 20 years or so. They submit it. It's supposed to be a completely blind taste test here, but he's already running the park. He's already the superintendent. He's the man. But his design probably was the best, but it wins. And it says here with a reservation, though, because they know this is a new idea. The art of landscape gardening is still in its infancy among us. And we have even heard it questioned within a very short time whether this country could boast of a single man equal to the management of the task submitted to the commission. Well, we're going to see whether Frederick Law Olmsted was equal to the task in just a moment. A nice drawing here of the actual plan, which they referred to as the Greenward Plan. One of the problems that they had here, that they had to overcome, was the fact that this is a 2.5-mile park right in the middle of town. It's hard. You really can't disrupt traffic for a solid 2.5 miles. It's just too much to go around. Olmsted came up with the ingenious idea of what he referred to as transverse roads. He has roads cutting across his plan at 65th Street, 79th Street, 86th Street, and 97th Street. But these roads aren't just eyesores running across the landscape. These roads are set into gullies. They're set into gullies with bridges across the top of them for the pedestrian traffic, so that if you're 100 yards away, you'd hardly know that there was even a road there. So he solves an intrinsic problem in the park's design with the most aesthetically pleasing alternative possible. Frederick Law Olmsted, though, needs even more power. By the time we're done, we're going to see that he's basically got at his command the equivalent of 2 army divisions. He needs more power. And so on May 18th, 1858, the New York Tribune reports that Frederick Law Olmsted Esquire, the present superintendent, was elected to the office of architect-in-chief of the park. Now he's running the whole show. He's administratively running it. He's design-wise running it. He's the man. One of the first things you got to do, you got to assemble the land. Remember, they've drawn lines on a map. You know, from 59th Street to 106th Street, and from Fifth Avenue to 8th from Fifth Avenue to 8th Avenue. They've drawn lines, but they don't own it. In order to own it, you've got to expropriate it. You've got to use the concept of eminent domain and compensate the owners. And the owners were compensated. And from what we can read here, they were compensated very well. There were, at the time of the institution of the plan, 34,000 individual lots within Central Park, and there were 1,500 people living there. Well, if you rented, you did just get the boot. But if you owned the property, you have to be expropriated. And they put aside $1.7 million to do the expropriations. but they weren't even close. It ended up costing them $7.4 million to expropriate the land within Central Park. To give you an idea how much money that is, that's half the price of the Louisiana Purchase. When the United States purchased from France all the land from New Orleans to the headwaters of the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, basically a quarter of the landmass of the continental United States, that cost them $15 million. This was $7.5. And in fact, that $7.5 million is more money than would be spent a couple of years later on purchasing Alaska, Seward's Folly. They actually spent more just on assembling the land for the park. And what that tells you, it tells you a couple of things. It tells you about the great wealth that's being generated in the northern United States in the 1850s and 1860s, the Industrial Revolution, followed by the Financial Revolution. There's just a lot of money going around, a lot more than there's ever been. Now, in 1859, the commission reports back to the city on how they're doing and how they're spending the money. And so this article is in the New York Daily Herald, February 20th, 1859, extremely long article, but we're just going to excerpt it here. The breaking of stones was continued through the earlier months of the year in 1858 with a view of preparing the necessary material for the construction of the roads. Several miles of walks are graded, drained, and graveled and in a condition for use. So they already got several miles of roads done in the first year. A lake of about 20 acres above 76th Street is so far completed as to admit filling it with water during the winter and has afforded healthy amusement and recreation for thousands and skating. So skating right off the bat becomes a big deal here. And they note that numerous applications for clubs of skaters for baseball and cricket players for accommodation in the park have been made. Everybody wants in. Everybody wants a piece of the action. And all the buildings, remember, the 1,500 people were there. All the buildings have been removed. They've been disassembled and sold, and the money's put in the public treasury. We got a nice picture here of skaters here in the 1860s in Central Park. Hopefully that's on your screen. Not everything, was as smooth and as magical as it could have been here. Well, here we have an article. There was one community there called Pigtown in the middle of Central Park that they had to get rid of. And this is what the New York Daily Herald had to say. By the magical influence of a determined will and an honest regard to his duty, he has swept from the surface of the island the greatest plague spot that disfigures it. Yes, Pigtown is no more, and we believe that it will not be in the power of the rottenness of the officials that political influences may hereafter thrust upon us to revive its extinct nuisance. And then they talk about the Croton water supply freshening everything up. So they got rid of Pigtown as part of the expropriation of Central Park. They also note, in the article in the New York Daily Herald of February 20th, 1859, the work of constructing transverse roads across the lower part of the park for the accommodation of traffic and business traffic is going forward. And finally, they make the very important announcement that the liberty to take street manure for fertilizing the park would be very desirable, inasmuch as otherwise other fertilizing matter must be purchased. So they're going to take a hazard and a nuisance and turn it into a benefit. Now, the concept of a free concert in Central Park did not begin with Simon and Garfunkel. Here we have the New York Times, Saturday, July 23rd, 1859. Where it's noted, the Ramble in Central Park, the free concert to which the public will this evening be treated, free of expenses to them, will comprise, as per advertised, a brilliant of the most delightful and elevating music. Harvey Dodworth leads as usual. Of course, Harvey Dodworth leads. And those concerts in the 1860s, it was noted in the New York Times, could draw as many as 100,000 people. At that point in time, more than a tenth of the population. And what did the public think of the park? Now remember, as they're completing the park and working northward, they're opening the park south of where the construction is. So the public is getting a sense of what the park's going to be. Here's an article in the New York Daily Herald, June 25th, 1860. From morning till night did the mighty Gotham pour out through its half-dozen railroad funnels, a throng of people all wandering thitherwards. It is estimated that no less than 60,000 people yesterday availed themselves of the mighty breathing spot to retire from the dusty streets of the city. The park itself is in a forward state of improvement, and its 1,700 workmen are daily developing beautiful features which in another season, by the help of nature, will be perfect. So now instead of 700, we're up to 1,700 people working on the park. It's noted that planting is actively going on, trees, flowers, and shrubs springing into life with a suddenness which marks the presence of some modern Aladdin with his wonderful lamp. So the park is going ahead. It's starting to look like a park, not finished, but certainly being appreciated by the public. The New York Daily Herald, New York, Saturday, June 30th, 1860, notes that not is all well. There are rumors that there have been there may be graft, there may be shoddy workmanship, there may be shortcuts taken, there may be mismanagement of the huge amount of public funds here. So a state Senate hearing is called, and it lasts for 8 days. Here's the partial testimony of Frederick Law Olmsted. He states he never called himself a landscape gardener. He's an architect. He notes that it is not with respect to people wondering why are all these boulders being moved all over the park. He states, it is not unusual to plant boulders in a park. The rockwork and the waterfalls are original designs of mine. They ask him whether he's working specifically to the plan and how closely he's staying to the plan. And he says, we have no definite plan. The one we are working from is simply a sketch. And that's what they are. They've got that original sketch that you've seen. But when they're on the ground, they're at eye level. They're making changes as they go. The path needs to be wider here, narrower there. We've got to remove this hill. They're making those decisions as they go to make an aesthetically pleasing park. And he notes that they've already got 2 miles of roads here, various widths servicing the park. They comment on where's the money going, and the basic response is the plan was originally the plan, but everyone's making changes. And it's not me that's making changes. I'm being requested by the commission, I'm being requested by the mayor, being requested by everybody to make changes. They want a more elaborate park, and that's going to cost more money. The park was originally scheduled, the original budget was $1.5 million. They now know it's going to be more than $4 million. Here's what they said. 10% was added to cover contingencies in changing the plans of the original estimates. For the fountain, give you an example. For the fountains and terraces, it was originally supposed to be $25,000. They've already spent $40,000, and it's expected that it'll take another $40,000 to finish it. But when it's done, you're going to have much more elaborate, much better terraces. But everything costs money. He notes with respect to bridges that it was $29,000. Well, they blew through that a long time ago. You're going to have the greatest bridges ever, but it's going to cost you more money. And with respect to waste, he says here, in regard to the statement made by Mr. Keyes about bridges being torn down, it was false. Nothing of the kind has been done. He did not know of any bridge being moved 40 feet from its original foundations. There was a rumor that they'd taken a bridge, built it, and then just moved it 40 feet to the right because they liked it better over there at the cost of, several, tens of thousands of dollars. That apparently didn't happen. He notes he's got a salary of $4,000. $4,000, that's only $120,000. Doesn't seem enough. But he says here, his time is fully occupied, generally night and day. He has no business hours. He's been consulted on plans for several other parks, but he's been employed only by Central Park during that time. Now, what did the papers have to say about that? Papers love a good scandal, but here we have the New York Daily Herald, June 29, 1860. It says, the Senatorial Central Park Investigation Committee met at the Astor House again yesterday and patiently listened to the questioning of the witnesses by Mr. Hogg. No fact was ascertained against the commissioners. On the contrary, the testimony fully sustained them in their course. The charges and alterations from the original, about which so much has been said, were shown in many instances to have been done for economy's sake. So whether that's true or not, the papers are on board and they're moving public opinion, and the public opinion is behind Olmsted and the development of the park. We've got a really nice aerial, it's not a photograph, it's an aerial drawing showing how the park looked in the mid-1860s. You can see here from the drawing, the park is substantially completed in theory, and that surrounding the park, about a third of the lots are full. Development right along Fifth Avenue and right along Park Avenue has not been completed, but the park sits there in the middle of this developing neighborhood. Now, in building the park, they divided the work thusly. Olmsted was in charge of the plan, was in charge of landscaping. Vaux was in charge of architecture. So Olmsted is developing the site, putting in the direction of the roads and the transverse roads and such. Vaux is responsible for the building of the dozens of buildings that are going into the park, from Tavern on the Green to the bridges to sheds, whatever's going in there. He's one doing that. This is a big project. You've got to realize that Central Park is like the rest of Manhattan, is made of granite. If you want to move granite, if you want to take a hill down 10 feet, if you want to dig a basin for a lake, you've got to blast. And they were using basically military-grade explosives and military quantities of explosives. They eventually moved 5 million cubic feet of material out of the park. As many as 20,000 people worked at the park, which, as I said earlier, is two military divisions. They had their own police force. One thing that's interesting is that they continued to build throughout the Civil War. They didn't stop construction just because the war was going on. And this is an aside. It just shows you how the North fought the Civil War with one arm tied behind their back. The projects such as this continued. The Capitol Dome continued. Industry and development and agriculture continued. Did you know that between 1960 and 1965, during the war, more than 4 million people moved to the United States? and none of them moved to the south. The North was a going concern, as an aside, generating enough wealth to fund the war, whereas the South had to throw everything they had into it to keep it going in its terribleness for the full 4 years. Now, Olmsted was affected by the war. He was willing to do his patriotic duty. He was invited in November of 1862, along with about 20 other fellows, to form something referred to as the Sanitation Commission. Think in terms of hospitals and relief. Here's the headline from the New York Tribune, Monday, November 3rd, 1862. For the sick and wounded, under an order from the President of the United States, a national system has been established by the Sanitary Commission for the safe transmission and judicious distribution of articles contributed by the people for the sick and wounded of the Army and Navy. It's basically an organized ambulance, nursing, medical system that just didn't exist before. Here we're favored to have Olmsted's report on the Battle of Gettysburg and what they did. It's from the Litchfield Inquirer, Thursday, July 16th, 1863. The Gettysburg Battle. We are happy to have the opportunity to lay before our readers a letter recently received in this village from Frederick Law Olmsted, Esquire, of the U.S. Sanitation Committee. And here's what he says. Well, in Philadelphia, we bought several tons of fresh eggs, butter, mutton, chickens, fruit, milk, etc., which were delivered on Sunday morning to a refrigerating car with a ton of ice, no refrigerators, that we chartered for the purpose. Coming here in advance of the car, we bought a lot of large camp meeting tents and miscellaneous furniture, loading them into another car. Last night, we got our ice car over to the North Central Road, and both cars attached to the first train through to Gettysburg after the battle. So they're there within days after the battle with provisions. Our regular wagon force was on the ground during the battle, and the wagons visited all the field hospitals as fast as they were established, and hours before they received supplies from other quarters. So he's on there taking care of the injured and wounded. He notes with respect to the battle itself, I'm pretty well tired with day and night work, but I am well. Lee is not routed by any means, and our army, when the battle was over, had hardly a breath in it. For fully half an hour, it was within a hair's breadth of a terrible defeat. A single additional gun in the hands of the enemy might have broken our line, and all would have been lost. But our men never behaved so well, and I believe they fought better than the enemy. They were cool and steady and showed very good quality of veterans. He notes that the moral effect of the victory is incalculable, taking into connection with Vicksburg. So, as we know, Vicksburg fell the same day, and it was a great boost to the morale of both the North, and a detraction from the morale of the South. Now, he's working so hard with the Sanitation Commission that he has basically a nervous breakdown, and he takes himself out west. He goes on an adventure. He goes out to California, where unbelievably he becomes an officer of the Mariposa Estate, which is a gold mining corporation controlled by John C. Fremont. Now, John C. Fremont's a very controversial Civil War figure. I always thought of him as kind of a blustering incompetent, kind of like Major Frank Burns. He succeeds wildly above his ability, and one of his successes is this Mariposa Estate. Olmsted stays there for a couple years, gets involved in some conservation movements with respect to Yosemite and things like that, but eventually he's drawn back to New York City, and he teams back up with his partner in 1865, and the New York Tribune of August 2nd notes, now our park has been planned and the work carried out by two men who were moved in every step they took by the largest and most generous American ideas. This was to be no park for swells. This was not going to be this was a park for everybody, even though the swells would attempt to maximize its usage. Every day there became a little ceremony. It was the daily carriage parade, where the good and the great would be able to show off their rigs and their teams as they paraded through the park in a manifestation of vain capitalism, let's say. The Tribune carried on, however, with and concluded thusly. Of course, it must take many years for all their far-reaching plans to be carried out, but every year adds something. Really, only our children will come to appreciate the fullness of their design, and they're true. It takes a long time for trees to grow to be 80 feet tall. Now, as the park is being developed, and it won't be officially completed till 1876, a couple of buildings go up there that are associated with the park. The first is actually across the street from the park, but I've always considered it part of the park. Here's what it is. The American Museum of Natural History. It's built on Manhattan Square, which was land set aside to be a parkette, to be one of those squares in the 1811 survey. That Manhattan Square, as it was called, it was basically was as bad a land as could be. It was basically a granite swamp. It was rock and swamp, but it was perfect for the foundations of a building. And so here we have the New York Times on Wednesday, June 3rd, 1874. Brilliant scene at Manhattan Square. The cornerstone of the new fireproof building, which is being erected for the trustees of the American Museum of Natural History by the Department of Public Works, was laid yesterday by President Grant. It's noted that Manhattan Square is divided from Central Park by 8th Avenue, and the style of the architecture is to be Venetian Gothic, whatever that is. I didn't know you could put those two things together and form an architectural statement, but apparently they do. And the main architect of that is Vaux. Vaux is going to be instrumental in both this building and the next, which is the Met, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, America's great museum. In fact, one of the world's 2 or 3 best museums. If you're going to go to the Metropolitan Museum, which is located in the grounds of Central Park, you really have to see a couple of things. Go see Henry VIII field armor. You've never seen royal done for a fat guy. It's really quite amazing. And the other thing you want to see is John Singer Sargent's Madame X, probably the best portrait painting ever done by anyone, anywhere. We've got a copy of the original design here of the Metropolitan Museum, including the obelisk. And that original design has been added to many times. The Met today is multiple times larger than what went in the 1870s. We got a photograph here of the Dakota as well, the Dakota apartment building. That went in 1884, and it shows the park just after it's been completed. People are skating there, but it shows you the skyline along 8th Avenue with its gap tooth. It's just in the process of being filled in, and of course the Dakota is infamous / famous for Rosemary's Baby and John Lennon. Now what happens? The park gets finished in 1876. What happens to all the participants here? Well, Vaux and Olmsted split amicably in 1873. Vaux goes on, as I said, to concentrate on his architectural work, public buildings and such, Metropolitan Museum. Olmsted focuses on landscape architecture. He's extremely busy. Everybody wants him. They've seen what he's done in Central Park. In 1877, he goes to Montreal and designs Mount Royal Park, which is on top of the mountain there, and we've got a picture here of the design. Beautiful park. He teams up with H. Richardson and Richardsonian Romanesque architecture. The stuff with the big stones, the round Roman arches. Well, you got to landscape those kinds of buildings appropriately, and the man to do it, of course, is Olmsted. He goes on in the 1880s to develop the parks all across America, in Buffalo, Washington, Niagara Falls, and Detroit. One of his masterpieces is in Detroit. It's Belle Isle. Belle Isle is a park in the middle. It's on an island in the middle of the Detroit River. It's larger than Central Park. It's presently undergoing $100 million renovation. The fountains, the casino, the park itself is being restored. It's going to look better than it ever did. People don't realize. The Married with Children fountain in Chicago. The fountain on Belle Isle is better than that, but nobody's seen it. Go see it. It's a wonderful thing. Now, he continues on. Olmsted continues on in the business up until the 1890s, when his mental health fails. He's probably suffering from dementia, and he finally dies in 1903. His sons take over the business, and they run it, and the family runs it. It's until the 1970s. They're still doing landscape design. And Olmsted was important not just for landscape architecture. He invented the whole concept of manually manipulating the landscape for the betterment of the enjoyment of people. I would propose that if not for him, you wouldn't have people like Donald Ross, the noted golf architect, whose company developed hundreds of golf courses after the turn of the century. He's in the direct line of descent from Frederick Law Olmsted. Now, Central Park, well, it would have its ups and downs. It would mirror the city. In the 1930s, with the coming of the Depression, it begins to go to heck. Robert Moses comes in. He's the savior of everything park-related in New York City. He improves it in the late 1930s, but it slides back into disrepair in the 60s and 70s. it gets that reputation that you get from all those movies of taking a Pelham 123. New York was a hellhole in the 1970s, to the extent that the Rolling Stones in their song "Miss You," the very concept, the very thought of going out after dark in Central Park means you must be crazy. But with the 80s and the 90s, the park situation has been restored. The park, there's nothing to beef too much about the way the park is being handled right now. The crime rates in the park are just a tiny fraction of what they are outside the park. To a great extent, the park has never looked better. If you haven't been to Central Park, you really should. It's really one of the gems of America. Now, we've built Central Park. You deserve a break. And what should you do at the end of the day when you lay down your shovel? You lay down your shovel and your field glasses. You had a hard day of building a park. Well, I would suggest that you have a Park Avenue cocktail. Why not? Park Avenue is this: 2 ounces of gin, an ounce of pineapple juice, an ounce of dry vermouth, a half an ounce of orange curacao. You can substitute Grand Marnier if you want a little richer drink, and ice. You shake the ingredients vigorously, because remember, you got juices in there. Anytime you got a drink with a juice, you shake. If it's just liqueurs or liquors, you can stir. Shake vigorously. Chill a coupe glass. Now, a coupe glass is this. This would have been like a 1930 champagne glass, but it's a coupe glass. No one drinks champagne. But for a cocktail like this, chill it. You chill it by putting ice into it, or put it into the freezer before you use it. Strain it into that coupe glass and enjoy. Enjoy your Park Avenue as you stare across Park Avenue into Central Park and think back on a life well lived by Frederick Law Olmsted. Now, we'll be out with another episode next week. Make sure you like and subscribe. Subscribe so you make sure you know when it drops, okay? So everyone have a great evening. Take care, everybody, and good night.